Thank you very much. Without further ado, I will start this panel about the global challenges. Because of the short time, I'll just make a few points and then hand it over to the colleague ambassadors. The first point I want to make is that in the increasing interdependent world today, we have so many new challenges upcoming that are touching every single country, starting with the terrorism and migration and the financial crisis and the fake news. But in this country, on top of this, we also have the perennial challenges, the threats that are as old as the international relations, as old as the world, such as the physical use of force, the threat of the use of force, divided lines, occupation. Therefore, we have to deal with both of this. And this adds to the security environment in this particular region for us. So that is the first point. A very obvious point, we all know this, but sometimes our friends, our colleagues tend to forget that together with these new challenges, we are still facing these old, very serious problems. The second point that is linked to this one is that today, none of these challenges can be solved on your own. And no country can deal with these challenges simply with the bilateral relations, simply with the bilateral dialogue, simply with the bilateral efforts. And that's why most of these require actually the multilateral efforts. And one of the reasons why Georgia is aspiring to be an actor in the region, is aspiring to become the member of NATO and the European Union, is not only because we have the strong European identity, not only because the population really wants to join, and yes, we are of a very strong European identity, but also because integration into these European and Euro-Atlantic institutions is one of the best ways to deal with these challenges. And I think that is an important point to keep in mind for all those who believe that some things can be sorted out bilaterally and not through the international cooperation. The third point that I want to say is that unfortunately also for a small country like Georgia, this agenda of international relations in Europe particularly is too heavy. And there are so many issues that all the countries are dealing with that this means that most of the problems that we want to sort out are very hard to be dealt by from our partners. And unfortunately, as the time passes, these issues become neither more simple nor less. So we are now increasingly facing a number of new challenges in the European Union, for NATO, increasing aggressive behavior by the Russian Federation. And this effectively for a small country like Georgia means that our problems are very often relegated back to the agenda of our leading partners. This is not to say that they don't care, not at all. I understand and fully recognize that they realize how big is the problem that we have with Russia, but at the same time, the abundance of the other problems pushes down our issue. Now this leads me to my next point, which is that sometimes this leads to a certain dilemmas. Now, and this is not even a political dilemma, but sometimes even a mental dilemma for many people. Having said all this, what should be the right course of action? Should we just sit back and wait for the good opportunity, or should we be more active, and should we be redoubling our efforts? And I believe that the countries in this particular region, whether it is my country or the other countries, should be on the track of being just as active as they ever were, and actually being more contributors to the security and not sitting back. And I think when I say this, I mean not only the participation in different international operations, but also being an actor as much as we can on a global scale, whether this is within the international organizations, whether it is the contribution to the United Nations missions, the EU missions, etc. And this is something that is extremely important for a small country like Georgia. And the final point, and I'll hand over to the colleague ambassadors, is that having said all this, I think a crucial point is still linked to the topic of the previous session, which was here, which is the state of democracy. And the title of that session was From Independence to Democracy. And I think as an optimist that we are on the track towards the democracy, but we are not there yet. And I believe that this country will be a democracy, will be a solid institutional democracy, which is not right now, but it is on the track. And I think that years will pass, and sooner than later this is going to happen. And I think that is what's going to make Georgia are very strong, because we cannot be the strongest country in this region, we fully understand that, but we certainly can be the most democratic. And the democratic institutions and the strength of the country, I believe, depends precisely on this point. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the floor is yours, Ambassador to Belgium, Ambassador of Belgium to Georgia. Thank you.
Dear Mr. Chairman, dear Mr. Deputy Chairman, dear Ms. Chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for this invitation. On the 5th of June 1992, the Republic of Georgia and the Kingdom of Belgium established diplomatic relations. Since then, the ties between our two countries developed into an extensive and fruitful cooperation. And during these 25 years, numerous bilateral high-level visits took place. The most recent one was the visit to Tbilisi in April this year of the Speaker of the Belgian Parliament, Mr. Brakke, accompanied by 3 members of Parliament. Mr. Chairman, also on behalf of Mr. Brakke, congratulations, and thank you again for the very warm welcome. The intense conversations during this visit clearly showed how active democracy in Georgia is and which vital role Parliament and its members, as representatives of the people, play in this, now and in the future, by making good laws, by controlling the executive power, and by being accountable to the Georgian people. On the 30th of December 2016, this Parliament unanimously adopted a resolution on the foreign policy for Georgia for the following years. Congratulations for this initiative and for the fact that the decision was taken unanimously, members of Parliament from the majority and opposition parties united. And peace and security are the key objectives in this policy, and working closely together with partners is the way to realize these goals. And it's not a coincidence that the title of this panel is Shared Commitment to Global Peace and Security. 2 of these key partners are the European Union and NATO, both based in Brussels, the capital of Belgium. So recent 25 years showed that Georgia has lots of friends in Brussels who are willing to take up the shared commitment to ensure peace, security, and prosperity on the European continent and in Georgia and the broader region in particular. Please be always welcome in Brussels. And I have to admit, direct flights between Tbilisi and Brussels would be useful. Dear Mr. Chairman, dear friends, again, congratulations with this anniversary and up to the next 25 years.
Her Excellency Ambassador to Bulgaria, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, Madam First Deputy Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Madam Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, members of Parliament, Excellencies, colleagues. First of all, thank you for this invitation, and thanks to the Parliament of Georgia for deciding and organizing such kind of reflective event regarding this 25 years. And congratulations for all those that celebrate 25 years of diplomatic relations this year. And congratulations, of course, to Georgia for regaining its 26 years ago independence. It is very difficult to speak after so many and so distinguished speakers that have tried to address one and the same topic, but having in mind this, I'll try to be as short as possible and to make a short summary. It is no doubt that Georgia has gone a long path and has achieved a lot, that she has shattered the ceiling in the political and democratic developments, and of course there is a lot ahead, but all of us, and especially Bulgaria, has been always supporting Georgia in its main foreign policy priorities, namely NATO and EU integration, and I could assure you that we'll continue to do this. The fact that for the second time we are NATO contact point embassy in Tbilisi is a firm example of this cooperation, of this support. Just to summarize actually how long the path was and where we are now, actually, Georgia, what the achievements were. We have the substantial NATO-Georgia package. We have NATO-Georgian Commission, North Atlantic Council meeting in Tbilisi, NATO Parliamentary Assembly meeting in Tbilisi, participation in Afghanistan, and before that of Kosovo, of Georgian contingent, which is one of the biggest that works together with NATO allies there. And this, Georgia is contributing a lot in the Black Sea region in the field of security too. Readiness to remain eager. This is probably the most important thing we should commend Georgia about. Its willingness, political will to continue on the path of reforms. And again, to reassure you for the strong solidarity in the context of security challenges. Regarding what we have done as NATO contact point embassy this year, I could recall only the annual national program workshop, basic human course, substantial NATO-Georgia package synchronization workshop, NATO coffee, participation in the NATO week with a second award to a Georgian painter to go to Bulgaria, and a lecture regarding NATO and our path there. And the event that is planned for the beginning of July is actually supporting of a seminar for journalists that work on the NATO topic, because we were assured here that this is one of the most important issues in the public diplomacy for Georgia, to spread as much as possible information regarding, solid information regarding what NATO is, what could be expected, and to have reasonable expectations. Regarding European Union and the forthcoming Eastern Partnership Summit, I could assure you that Bulgaria in general supports the proposals Georgia has handed, and that we are ready to work with you on achieving that goals in the framework of the existing financial mechanisms. To congratulate you on the visa liberalization, and to say that this is not, we regard this not as a final step, but rather as a recognition of the hard work you have done. Of course, Georgia is very important in the context of security and energy supply, in the context of connectivity. This is a key to prosperity. And again, it is the place to say that we support the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Georgia, and we contribute to the EUMM and the other, we support also the other mechanisms that exist in the way trying to solve the problem. Bon voyage in the further reforms, and we are with you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now, Her Excellency, Ambassador of Estonia to Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Vice Speaker. Dear Sofiko, thanks for organizing this event. It is really interesting to see from how many different angles people can address actually the same subject. So it's European Union in its full diversity, I would say. But Estonia and Georgia established the diplomatic relations on June 17th, 25 years ago, re-established actually. And of course, Estonia is one of those countries who has been through a transition process itself during this 25 years, and has served to Georgia, of course, as an example in many ways. But I very much liked actually what the Latvian ambassador said, that Georgia is becoming more and more an inspiration also to us or to the others. So for Estonia, it has been always the aim during these 25 years to become from security consumer to security provider. And I would say that this very same tendency is also observable here. So Georgia is actually more and more trying to take up roles, showing responsibility. One of the examples, of course, is Georgia is an active contributor in Afghanistan, Mali, Central African Republic. But of course, a country cannot just contribute to the world security and order by contributing to hard security. There are many other ways and means to do that. And one of those is sharing its own experience. And I would also say that Georgia is already active on that field. An example would be last year in September, Estonian President Ilves and Georgian Prime Minister Kvirikashvili shared their experience to the third countries about e-governance. And Estonia is famous, of course, for its IT image, but I would say Georgia has also a huge potential on the very same field. You have many tech-savvy young people, very supporting startup environment. Also on the government side, there are already many services in place to support the private sector development on this field. And this, of course, can only contribute to the services sector and thereby to the economic growth, which is actually the basis for the country to be stable. And so the more stable and prosperous a country is, the more it can, of course, also be responsible and accountable member of the international community. But I would say one thing is that makes Georgia unique, and this is that it has to fight with this sneaky annexation on the occupied territories, which is taking place day by day. And it seems that there is still too little attention to this issue. Raising it more on the international scene on various forums, that is probably something that Georgia and its friends can do more. So, thank you very much.
His Excellency Ambassador of France to Georgia, please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, dear Irakli, Mr. Speaker, dear Tamuna, and dear Sopiko. It's really a pleasure to be with you today, and I would like to congratulate you while organizing this conference and giving us the opportunity to take the floor. In the field of defense and security, I would say that France and Georgia have a very special relationship. Maybe you have noticed a couple of weeks ago, the mayor of Tbilisi inaugurated a new street called Le Ville-sur-Orge, which is a very small city, not far from Paris, where the government of Georgia in 21, when the Red Army invaded Georgia at that time, has received asile in France and welcome. I would remind also the tragic event you have known in 2008 and the role played by Nicolas Sarkozy, French president at that time, who was just taking over the presidency of the EU in order to establish a dialogue and also to play the role of broker between Russia and Georgia and to restore peace as soon as possible. At that time, we have sent a lot of gendarmes to constitute what has become the EUMM in order to separate the different troops. If I remind these events, it's just to show the progress which has been made by Georgia since the independence, because as my colleague of Estonia mentioned, you have become gradually not only a security consumer, but a security provider, which shows that we have developed a real partnership relationship in this field. I will mention a few elements to show that. You take part in UN different fora, including the one Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, Biological Weapon Convention, Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and so on. Every year, France supports your resolution in terms of recognizing a right of return for refugees, internally displaced persons, regardless of ethnicity. This attests Georgia's involvement in a broad way in the world affairs. As far as NATO is concerned, you have been one of the non-member major contributor to send the troops to Afghanistan and also to Central Africa in the framework of the European CSDP. For all these efforts, we would like to pay tribute to you and to assure you of our steady support for your integrity, territorial integrity and sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And our next speaker is Ambassador of the Republic of Poland to Georgia. Please.
Oh, yes, I have the microphone. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, dear parliamentarians, dear friends. We have just 3 weeks ago a visit of the President of Poland to Georgia, and most of the topics during the meetings with President of Georgia, with parliamentarians, with a Speaker of Parliament, Prime Minister, was about the security. We were also celebrating 25th anniversary of our establishing our relations, but we have launched also some projects to start in the next 2 years, celebrating 100 years of our diplomatic relations. Most of this time, Poland and Georgia was lost of their independency. Georgia for 70 years, Poland for 50 years, but still the relations between our nations, between representatives of civil society, artists, many others were very active. We remember many Poles here in Georgia that delivered to Georgia many interesting projects. More than 100 years ago, Mr. Hryniewski, Szymkiewicz, many others, they gave the fundament stone for our good relations. We remember also Georgian officers that served in Polish army and became the heroes of Polish history, especially during the Second World War. It was the time of the security. We were about security, we cared about security at that time. And we remember, of course, President Lech Kaczyński, who visited in 2008 with his friends, President of Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, and few others, head of states, visited Tbilisi to defend your country in diplomatic way, of course, to defend your country of aggression. So we have future, we have past, we have also future, and during the visit of President of Poland, you certainly heard these words of confirmed by head of Poland that we are backing Georgia in its way to NATO, to European Union, and still Poland, you have to remember, that is with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And the next speaker is the Ambassador of Swiss Confederation to Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speakers, members of Parliament, dear colleagues. I guess I'm on this panel, which is devoted to peace and security because of the role, the special role Switzerland has played in the past 25 years in this area here in Georgia, in the region, and still continues to play. I think we have to admit that this is an area where we have been somewhat less, to put it that way, somewhat less successful than in many other areas in terms of political, economic and social transformation. So we have still important unresolved conflicts. I won't go into the root causes of this, but I think it should be incite us to redouble our efforts to address these conflicts. Now, contrary to Switzerland, Georgia aspires to join NATO and EU, but this may not be enough to solve the problem of peace and security here. I think the past 25 years have shown that. Now, Switzerland precisely is not a member of NATO and the EU, does not aspire to become one, and through this fact, obviously is in a very good position to be considered an impartial, trustworthy, and honest partner in helping to settle the conflicts. We made a lot of efforts, beginning with the mission of late Ambassador Brunner in the 90s in the then Georgian Abkhazian peace talks, and Ambassador Heidi Tialevini, just to name the two. We took over the mandate, protecting power mandate between Russian Federation and Georgia. We mediate in customs monitoring agreement and other areas, foster dialogue, etc. Of course, good mediation is one factor, but there are other factors to settle conflicts, which is, of course, the willingness of parties to negotiate. That's one other factor, and international support for such a conflict settlement. I will finish by saying maybe the lesson of the past 25 years and also of the past recent years shows that there will be no enduring security and peace without a dialogue and cooperation between all the countries that are here in this region. And of course, this includes your northern neighbor. And I hope this missing piece of the Georgian success story will be solved in the coming years. Thank you very much.
His Excellency Ambassador of Ukraine to Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, dear friends, dear colleagues, it's a great honor for me to be present here today and to participate in this forum. And of course, it's a special event. And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and all organizers for this symbolic science we received, all of us today. It's very Georgian way, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you for that. And let me start from Ukraine and Ukrainian perspective. One of the first and the most important lessons we learned after aggression against Ukraine have been launched, that one must be strong to resist. And to be strong, one needs assistance and friends. As we see today, Georgia managed to get friends, to build successfully friendship relations. And this friendship with Georgia is projected in many different ways. People-to-people contacts, economic projects, assistance, good governance, strengthening of institutions and civil society. So, congratulations. It's a very big achievement. We have many things to celebrate today together. 25 years of diplomatic relations with Georgia is very important to every single state and representatives of the state present here. For Ukraine, it's even much important because our peoples were always very close through the centuries. And that is why for Ukraine, as for Poland, this date, 25th anniversary, is the date of re-establishment of diplomatic relations. Because 100 years ago, our leaders, at that time leaders, were wise to start diplomatic relations between Georgia and Ukraine. This panel is devoted to security. And let me, maybe it's not an anniversary remark, but still for me it's very important. If we talk about security, it's always about sovereignty, national integrity, but it comes to the citizen, to the individual, to every Georgian or Ukrainian, including those who are now on the occupied territories. So there is no security, there is no human rights, there is no future if the occupation would not be started and completed. And this is also a common, we have many common things between Georgia and Ukraine, starting from shared values, and we have the same aims of integration into the European Union and NATO, but we have also the same challenge and the same threats. And in this challenge, we need international support, we need international assistance, and we will continue to work very closely with Georgia as a strategic partner, and I'm sure that our people have a brilliant future, and many new pages will be added to this book of friendship between Georgia and your friends. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Her Excellency Chargé d'Affaires of the Embassy of United Kingdoms to Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, Deputy Chairman Sofiko, for arranging this evening and for inviting us all to speak to mark the 25th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Georgia and so many other countries. I'm conscious of the time, and I want to keep my remarks brief. In exploring this issue of our shared commitment to global peace and security, I wanted to pick up on an idea which I think was originally an American one, but could fairly be considered a global one now, which is a model of security policy defining security as consisting of four facets: DIME, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. In an uncertain world like today, diplomacy can often feel, I think, a bit old-fashioned, and I know I'm probably a little nervous about saying that with so many diplomats present. But I think it remains very much at the core of maintaining global peace and security. And I think Georgia has a potentially very useful and valuable role to play here, helping to act as a bridge between more modern and more traditional cultures, both regionally and more widely, and using its successful model of reform and its experience of multiculturalism to promote inclusive reform elsewhere. In the UK, through our Good Governance Fund, are very pleased to have supported work to further strengthen the capacity of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we're also supporting engagement between British and Georgian parliamentarians. But if diplomacy can appear a little bit old-fashioned, then managing and communicating information is certainly the security challenge for this millennium. As communication channels proliferate and change, there's a much greater emphasis not just on effective gathering, but also effective communication of information. And tackling challenges like cybercrime and terrorism are very much about how we deal, manage, and communicate information. The UK is delighted to be helping to build capacity here in Georgia on strategic communications, working with Georgia on cybercrime, and also helping to build an independent media here. So thirdly, the military facet. I'd endorse everything that other speakers have said about Georgia's role in supporting peace and security militarily and its contributions to a number of peacekeeping missions. And in terms of the UK-Georgia relationship, we're very proud to have such a deep and rich relationship in the military sphere, including joint military training and a strategic defence advisor in the Ministry of Defence. So lastly, the fourth facet, economic. I really think that economics has such a role in promoting peace and security globally. So many conflicts are driven by poverty and a lack of jobs. but also in terms of the threat that others have mentioned, of the strategic threat that Georgia finds itself in. I think Georgia's decision to build up its economy and strengthen itself that way is very, very relevant. The UK is very proud of our commitment to continue to spend 0.7% of gross national income on development assistance. And although we can't come close to the 1.5 billion of the EU or the 4 billion that the Americans, that Ambassador mentioned, spending here, we've supported some particularly useful projects, I think, like the capacity building for the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is relevant in speaking in this building. So just to conclude, two very simple messages. I think Georgia can be very proud of its contribution in supporting global peace and security, and we in the UK stand by you as you continue to make that contribution.
Maybe a few words to wrap up the session. First of all, thank you to all the contributors and participants. But I think we all need to be aware how long we have come forward. How long is the way that we have covered in the one century? 100 years ago, in 1918, when Georgia started its quest for independence, basically, there was the drive to gain recognitions. And a handful of countries recognized us at that time. Then we were annexed by Russia. In 1991, 92, this quest restarted again. And at that time, it was a series of the countries, including yours who are present here, who have established diplomatic relations with Georgia. In 2008, after the war, I remember when we were auditing the number of countries with which we have had diplomatic relations, it was only a handful, and we had over 100 countries with which we had no diplomatic relations. In 2012, when I left the government, I also remember that there were maybe close to 20 countries with which we did not have diplomatic relations. If I'm not mistaken now, the number of the countries with which we do not have diplomatic ties is in single digits, only few remaining. And that means that we have really come a long way forward in this last century, and this is largely and mainly because of you and your ancestors, obviously, and I'm really grateful and thankful for that these diplomatic relations and these ties really make us strong, and we also hope that we're contributing to your security as well. Thank you.